All right, welcome back to, I believe, part three of week 6, which is input and output, but this time it's with files. So we just covered manipulating streams and the input and output streams to the user. And if you just missed that, then go back and watch the part 2 video on the YouTube playlist. But we're going to look at actually reading text from a file and then outputting text to a file using the if stream, OF stream, and F stream preprocessor directives, okay? So let's start just with reading text from a file, okay? Before we worry about writing to it, because we have to make sure it exists and all of that, let's worry about reading from a text file, okay? So there's two common things, classes, I guess, we can use, or preprocessor directives we can use. It's the F stream and the IF stream, okay? This one is strictly for input. F stream can do both, okay? Now we read data from the file. I want you guys to think about it the same way that we read data from the stream in the cin, okay? When we use the cin in extraction operator, it's the same way we read data from the keyboard is the way we read from the file, okay? So we do pound include. These are the 5 steps when you're reading from a file. We do pound include F stream, okay? And that lets us use the F stream or IF stream object. So then we declare our object from that class. We connect it to the file on our file system. So we give it a path to the file and then the file name. And then 4 was we read the data from the file via the stream, and then we close the stream. This one's very important. We have to remember to close the stream, otherwise you can get some funky errors, okay? So we always close our stream. So moving on, what does that look like when we do it? So reading file locations are very specific on each operating system and each IDE. So CodeLight, I've experimented with both actually. I was fine on my system without the // but you might not be, okay? Because by default, the executable, the file is in the debug folder, whereas it creates the text file in the parent folder above it. But you just have to experiment with what works for you, okay? So opening a file for reading with the fstream object, okay, we created an fstream object from the fstream class here called in_file. So this is our input file. And it expects a couple arguments. So the first argument is the path, and then the second argument is the type of reading we want to do. So obviously by default, for the IF stream, it's in. When it's F stream, it doesn't know if you want to do in or out, okay? Because fstream can do both. So if we're using fstream, we have to specify through the standard namespace, the input output stream namespace that we're doing reading, okay? We're using the in flag. You can also use the pipe operator and then append another option in your second argument, which is the binary flag. And if your file was, say, binary or non-text content, then we could read binary file. We won't cover that in this class, but if you set that to true, then it's set to reading binary from the file. So notice fstream is being used here. If only the IF stream is being used, then we don't need to specify the input. So here's using the IF stream object. And you can see the second option here is the exact same as the first option, but we don't have to specify iOS in because it's default an IF stream. So it's used only for input files, and we can still pass that binary mode in the second argument, but we can also just get away with passing it the file location. Cool. So what does it look like when we do the operation when we open the file? Okay, so we use the open method. So here we can see on the first line, we declared an object named in_file. So that's our object there, and it's derived from the class IF stream. We also made a string named file name, okay, and then we are going to get the file name from the user. So the user will type the file name, okay, because a lot of times we don't know the file name. A lot of times we don't know what file we need to read from, so we get it from the user or we get it from something else. Then we just call the open method and we pass the file name that we want to open, and then we can also append the binary option to it, but we won't be doing binary. So just this first case scenario here, this first example is all you have to do, .open and then the file name. And it can also be good to use a file name variable because your file might be changing, right? You might have multiple files you're working with, and depending on which file the user chooses from a menu, maybe you pass that file name to that variable, and then you open that. It's just more dynamic this way. Okay, so now we need to check if our file is actually open, and there's a couple ways we can do that. We can use the is_open method, and basically if that's returning true, then all the code inside the curly braces will execute, else the file couldn't be opened, or maybe it doesn't exist, maybe there was an error while opening it. The other way we can check if the file was open is just put the name of our ifstream file, or what was it? ifstream in file. We literally just do if in file. We just check the object itself instead of checking .is open. We just check the object itself, and if it's true, then basically it means the object exists because it was able to access a file. So then we read from it. Otherwise, the file couldn't be opened. So this is just another option. This one to me is easier, but if you prefer using the .is open, you can do that too. And then we need to close it. Very simple. You just .close. All right. We always close a file because we need to flush out any unwritten data to it and just close that stream. All right. So for example, let's say we have a file here on the right that has the values 100, 255.67, and Larry. Okay. So we've got an integer, a float, and a string. We read we read data from files using the same exact operator, the extraction operator that we use when we read from the keyboard. Okay, same way we use it with cin, we use it from files. So here I've declared three variables. I've got int num, double total, and a string name. Okay, so obviously we can see those correspond with the values in the file. And then we just take our file. This is obviously after we've done our check if it's open. And then we just do in file and then use the extraction operator into num. We can also extract multiple items all in one line. So here we're extracting total and name, and it's just going to go in order. So obviously we put num first because we know there's a number first. Then we put total, which is the double, and then name. All right. We can also use the getLine function because the insertion operator will stop at the next blank space, right? So we can read the entire line without it actually breaking at the new line character. So we use the getLine function to read the file one line at a time. So this will actually read the entire first line. So we have a string called line here, and then we use the getLine function. We pass it our file name, and then we pass it the variable we want to store the line of code in. Because we know the extraction operator stops when it hits white space, basically that's the reason we use the getLine function, and it reads the entire line in one line of code. Okay. We can also use that getLine function in a loop, right? So say there's more than one line of text in your file, well, then we want to loop through it, and we want to go one line at a time and read through it. You'll see there's a .eof here, while not in file.eof. Well, the EOF stands for end of file. So we're basically saying while our file's end of file, and then we have the not in front of it. So while not at the end of our file, we will read our line of code. So it's basically just going to say, while there's still stuff in our file, loop through it and put it in this variable, this string called line, and then see out that line to the console. Then we close it afterwards, all right? And then our if here is just saying if not in file, so check if the file is open. So if we're not in our file, then just put an error out to the user saying the file could not open, error, and then return 1, right? Because all programs return 0, all main functions have to return 0, but if we return 1, then the program will exit. Cool. We can also embed these statements in the while condition, and the while condition will still return true while it reads the line. So it's important to keep that in mind because we can make our code a lot more cohesive. Here we have while in file, while it's not the end of the file, and then we're getting the line. This next slide, you'll see I just moved the getLine in file line into my while loop. So while I'm able to get a line from my input file and store it in this line variable, then cout. And then that will still work and we don't have to use the .eof method. Okay, we can do it either way, whatever you prefer. You might see both when you're looking at code. and both are correct. All right, so before I get into output, let's go to CodeLite. You can download the code from Blackboard there and just unzip it. We're going to just take a look at reading data from a file here. So what I want you guys to do is have your project created here on the left-hand side. And on your source folder, I just want you to click the Add a New File button. And then in here, you're going to write, test.txt. I'm going to write test2 because I already have a file called test, but you can just write test.txt and then hit OK. And you should see it pop up right here. And if you don't have it open in front of you, you can just double click it and see it's an empty txt file. All right. We can leave this empty, or we can also just type in the word hello and save it. And now there's data inside of our test2.txt file. I'll go back to my main.cpp and I'll just uncomment some of this stuff. All right. So at the very top of your project, you'll have an empty project. Make sure you have a couple of these things included, okay? I've included my preprocessor directive of fstream because we're working with file streams. So that allows us to work with input and output file streams. I've included my string class so that I can store things in C++ strings, and we'll talk about C++ strings versus C-style strings in another class. I've included my IO manip, even though I'm not using that, my SS stream, and then my limits, and those are for later, okay, when we talk about string streams. But for now, you'll definitely need these two, fstream and string. Okay, so coming back down, I have my IF stream, which is my input file stream, and I've called it input file, okay? Now, this is a fstream object of type input, so it'll only be able to read. And then I've created a string called line, so I'm going to read the lines in my file. Now, remember the 5 steps. So we open. The next step after we've created our file stream object is we open our input file. So I do input file dot open, and then I'm going to pass it the file I want to open. Now mine's called test2.txt. And remember, you might have to reference it like this. I'm very curious if you have to do the dot dot slash on yours or not. For me, it works without it. But you want them to be in the same directory as your main.cpp always. So if I right click on this and I do open containing folder, we can see here's my main.cpp and here's my text files right with my project. Okay. So once we've opened it, we want to check if it actually opens successfully. So we have our if input file. So you can do if input file dot is open, remember, or you can do just if input file. So if input file, then we're going to see out the file was opened successfully and then end the line. Now all of this stuff, I'll close this off, comment that off for now. So then we'll say files open successfully, then we'll close the file, and then we'll return 0, and we'll just exit the program. Now, else basically is going to be the else of this if. So else, the file obviously was not opened or there was an error, we're going to just do cerr or cout, problem opening file, end line, return 1. Okay, so I'm going to save and run that and see if we can open our test2.txt. And check that out. It says file was opened successfully. Okay, now if I do this dot dot slash, and I think if I change this 1 to 0 and run it, it'll actually stay open before exiting. It says problem opening file. So my if input file obviously triggered this. Now if you do the return 1, which I had originally, it will just exit the program like that. It just flashed on the screen and flashed back off. So mine doesn't work with the dot dot slash. Please let me know if yours does. I'm very curious. Different IDEs need different requirements. So if you're on Mac, Xcode, Visual Studio, there's different ways, but you always want them to be in the same subdirectory as your main.cpp is. Okay, so we can see these two lines of code that I commented out here, input file and C outline. So basically I'm using my extraction operator, the same one we use when we do cin, and I'm going to save it into my string variable called line. And then I'm going to see out to the user that line variable. And then we're just going to end it, close it, and return 0. So I would expect to see files open successfully, and then whatever I have in my test2.txt, which is the word hello. So I'm going to run it, and let's see if that's what we see. Check it out. Files open successfully. Hello. Now, what if I have, multiple lines of code? I don't think or multiple lines of text. I don't think we'll see them because we're not looping through it, right? We're just grabbing the first line of code there. And that is what you can see. Okay, cool. So that's the first example of using reading, from a file. I'll just close this off, comment it out, because we'll talk more about reading from a file a little bit later. Okay, any questions before we move on to output?